because of the lack of Wi-Fi we've had the last couple of days, it was a bit difficult, so bear with me. My background is I'm currently president of the World Hellenic Interparliamentary Association, which is Greek heritage legislators from around the world, so Australia, Canada, US, UK, wherever there's generally a Greek diaspora community. Part of being involved in those communities, part of it is public life, and so I represent all of them. But I'm also a former Minister for Tourism in the state of Victoria in Australia, a former Minister for Multicultural Affairs, working with all of our different various immigrant communities in the state of Victoria. I've been involved, being Greek means you've got to be, it's in your DNA to have an interest in history. But my interest is in also history that unites different cultures. That's what multiculturalism is about. So those of us from Australia know that we have a common heritage between Greece and Australia, for example, and that applies to people like communities all over the place. So Greek Americans have a common heritage of US involvement, as we've heard from some speeches here, in Greece, which is a joint and shared history. So military history in Greece is a shared history with many different countries around the world. And the principle behind shared history is that these things unite us because history is common. And as we've seen, not only is it common where you are allies, but even with your enemies. So, for example, Australia and Turkey have gone from enemies in World War I to great friends. So it can be a unifying thing, a joint experience. Greece, though, is extremely unique for many countries in that most of Greece at some time in World War I or World War II, and we've heard obviously about Lemnos, which was the beginning of it all, then the Salonika campaign or Greek Central Macedonia, and then it goes on to Corfu, as we've heard, and then it goes on into World War II, where again Allied forces were here in Greece for the defence of Greece as they were in the Salonika front in World War I. So these common stories are things that can help grow our relations between countries, can strengthen relations, can help improve diplomacy, but it requires also mutual, I guess, obligations and responsibilities. So a country like Greece that has 70% of its land surface, let alone all of the Aegean and Ionian Islands, where you have had Australian, New Zealand and British military forces as a minimum in both World War I and World War II. And of course in World War I you also had French forces, and not even including the colonial forces of the British Commonwealth like India, or the French colonial forces of Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, and others that were here in the region. So, for those of us that are Australians, for example, Australians, like the British and New Zealanders, covered 70% of Greece's landmass. If you want to look at that from a cultural heritage tourism perspective, and this is a point that I want to come into, is how can you create from history, in this case modern history, something that can become a shared travel experience by physically seeing the locations and the sites where your joint history occurred and happened. So how do you interpret that? And the benefits from that is you can get economic value and tourism value from that. So when you look at Greece, so we're starting at Lemnos in early 1915, it then moves on to the Salonika front from October of 1915 all the way up until the end of World War II in 1918. The part of Corfu, 1917-18, where I only found out today, 35 US vessels in Corfu, sharing with an Australian flotilla that was there, 8 Australian ships that were based at Corfu, enforcing the embargo on the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and then back here in 1918 as peacekeepers with what will become soon the new Turkey, and what we deal with the minorities of the region. Then World War II, of course, we have Australians, New Zealanders and British coming to Greece as early as November of 1914 with the Royal Air Force, which was made up of not only British Air officers, but also they were training those in the Dominion, so Australians were being trained in the UK, and they first arrived at Yanina Airport in support of the Greeks in the Italian campaign as informally as military advisors and running reconnaissance, and where the Allies, through the British, start a supply base at Suda Bay in Khaniyat, which becomes very important as a staging post for the Battle of Crete. It continues then as military conflict starts in Greece by the Germans invading, which in the northern city of Florina, 18 kilometres south of Florina, in what's called the Battle of Evi Klidi, which was around the 11th of 12th of April 1941. The Greek campaign continued on for a period of weeks, for 3 weeks, where it was basically a fighting retreat between Australians, New Zealanders and British with colonial forces there. There was a range of colonial forces, including from Cyprus, which was a colonial dominion at the time. A fighting retreat, a number of battles, the first, as I said, being at Vevi, then at Dolomieva, then at the Aliakmon River near the Serbia Pass, then the Tempe Valley, so between Mount Olympus and Mount Ossa, another fighting retreat at Bralos Pass. We heard about Bralos being a World War I Commonwealth War Cemetery, which was an entry point into Greece in World War I for those Allied troops that were being supported by US shipping but couldn't come into the Aegean because of the U-boat activity, so they found another way to come through. But again, Australians fought at Bralos Pass. The New Zealanders at Molos, which was near ancient Thermopylae. Then the Battle of Corinth on the 25th and 26th of April 1941. The Battle of Kalamata, 28th, 29th, ending the mainland Greece campaign. And then 3 weeks later, in the Battle of Crete, which commenced on May the 20th and ends in early June of 1941. I'm covering this because from a travel point of view, someone is more likely to come where there are multiple travel opportunities rather than one site. Gallipoli is very unique because it is one contained site, but for Greece it's probably more a comparable tourist product. If you wanted to go into a cultural heritage tourism product, it's more comparable to the Western Front in northeastern France and Flanders.